Okay, welcome to Rock Docs. We are here. Well, I'm David Lizerbram here with my co-host Andrew Keatts, and we are here today with a very special guest, Maria Sherman. She is here to talk to us or with us about the 2021 documentary Billie Eilish, "The World's a Little Blurry," directed by R.J. Cutler. Maria is a writer. She's recently written a book called Larger Than Life, which is kind of a history of boy bands, which is was super cool and it was a lot of fun. Cool illustrations, interesting theories, good stuff. She writes at a lot of different places. Maria, where is the best place for people to find you?
Ooh, gosh, Twitter, unfortunately, at Maria Sherm. That's where I will shamelessly self-promote, I think. But the best place is truly the bookstore, and you can check out Larger Than Life, even if you're not interested in boy bands. If you're interested in pop culture or music histories, it's got all of that, and it is pretty. So shout out my illustrator, Alex Fine.
Exactly. Well, also, hello, welcome.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. Wow.
Maria, have you fielded a call yet from Music Box, the folks at HBO? Your book just seems like a perfect for what they're doing over there.
I can neither confirm nor deny any adaptation, film, TV, or otherwise. Conversations have been happening somewhere in some capacity. And that wasn't even a good way of dodging that question. I apologize. That was not clever at all. But maybe.
Yes. Okay. Love it. Excellent non-denial or whatever. Okay, so let's just kind of get into this movie, Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry. The director, R.J. Cutler, has a long career behind him of directing a lot of fiction stuff, but also documentaries. The War Room was one that stood out to me because that was about the Clinton 1992 campaign that I remember was a big deal when it came out. It was almost like a very similar thing where it was the behind the scenes, and there was a lot of footage at the time of the actual thing happening. And so it's kind of interesting to see how that has kind of tracked. But Maria, when we usually have a guest, we ask them to pick a music documentary they want to talk about. So what made you interested in this one?
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty evident that I'm interested in pop music and youth culture sort of broadly. And there are a lot of very bad pop documentaries, especially when it comes to a younger artist. And I think a lot of it is maybe intimidation of trying to establish this person who perhaps hasn't proven themselves in the way the Beatles might have or whomever. And sort of putting them in a pop culture space that we're currently living in and making it engaging and whatnot. And it usually becomes really sort of self-righteous, or they sort of answer big existential questions. And this one, I think, kind of doesn't do that. And it really feels like it was capturing Billie Eilish very, very early on in her career, in a way that I can't really think of another documentary being comparable, at least in the sort of modern pop landscape. So it's very evident that I love this documentary. It is way too long, but other than that, pretty flawless.
Yeah. The other thing I would say about a lot of the pop documentaries that maybe are contemporaries with this film is that it just happens too early in an artist's career, and so they don't have enough of a story yet, and so it ends up feeling promotional. Whereas this really doesn't, because. And I think partially it's because they have a lot of home footage and cell phone footage from before she was famous. But it allows you to really see a really interesting period and a long period in Billie Eilish's career, going back to really before she was, I guess she was famous sort of in the sense that she had a SoundCloud recording out that generated millions of followers, but she wasn't winning Grammys yet.
Right.
And so you see the writing of that album, the production of that album, touring that album, the success of that album, and everything that's going on in her life at that time, which provides a lot more substance than I think you would typically get from a young artist early in their career, where they don't have time to run into tension yet. She hasn't had any sort of significant friction in her career at this point, but it nonetheless, she was able to see a whole story play out.
I guess maybe we're working a little backwards here, but I do want to, for people who haven't seen it, kind of capsule the movie. I mean, basically what it is it's on Apple Plus or Apple TV Plus or whatever that thing is called. And it's like you said, it's a little long. It's about 2 hours 20 minutes, and it covers Billie Eilish from basically she's I think 15, 16, kind of at the beginning of the movie. You see her 16th and 17th birthdays, and then it ends when she's right when she's 18. But basically, what it is Billie is a teenager. She was homeschooled. She lives with her parents through the movie. I don't know if she still does, but at the time she did, in the home where she grew up in the Valley. Of Los Angeles. Her parents were kind of artists and into music and actors, things like that. They're a very close-knit family. She and her older brother Phineas were homeschooled and just surrounded by music and art. And you see in this documentary her and Phineas, who's a producer, producing in his childhood bedroom her entire first album, which ended up like winning every Grammy and was a huge blockbuster hit. And you see her kind of going on bigger and bigger tours through this time, dealing with kind of just growing up, getting her driver's license, basic things that, teenagers go through, a failed romance.
a very typical high school, like failed teenage romance.
We can get into that. So the culmination of the movie, I mean, it's really a rise and rise.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and just at the end, you just see her and Phineas, chatting with Justin Bieber, holding an armful of Grammys, and just kind of on top of the world. Does that kind of summarize it for you, Maria?
Yeah, I would say so. One slight correction: their family home is in Highland Park, which is a pretty cool neighborhood.
Okay.
Made notorious by Mark Maron, maybe.
Mark Maron, yes, it's a podcaster neighborhood.
Yes,
okay, so but more East LA than the Valley,
right? But they certainly it probably wasn't a very cool neighborhood when they purchased the house. But now it's like, oh, of course, she has these incredibly supportive, empathetic, hippie, cool as heck parents, and lives in Highland Park and all that jazz. But yeah, I think you sort of nailed it. That's the trajectory for sure.
I kind of you could look at a movie from a lot of different levels. And I on one level that I really was engaged in this movie is as parenting advice.
Yes.
Being Mandy and I both have young kids. And I mean, Marie, what do you think about her relationship with her parents? That is to me, the core dynamic of the movie is her relationship with her parents.
I absolutely agree. And I think it's actually, that's funny that you point that out. And perhaps it's because it sort of mirrors your life in some capacity, because it's not the one that I think was sort of honed in on in a lot of reviews. I was going back and seeing what people liked about the movie, and very few talked about the parents' dynamic and how sort of, again, supportive they are, and not controlling, but always there for her. I'm always curious about when you have somebody who becomes so famous so quickly, so young, the people sort of around them, because you hear so many sort of like behind the music type stories. And it seems like they genuinely want to protect her best they could without sort of, I don't know, pushing her in the wrong direction. And sort of trying to take a step back and thinking about how the world views her too. Like there's that one moment where her mom is in their kitchen and she's talking about Justin Bieber and Billie Eilish, sort of developing this sort of mentor-mentee relationship a little bit, because she was obsessed with Justin Bieber. And she's sort of talking about how she wishes every young starlet would have a very supportive family. And I thought that was very clever. And then she has this other line about sort of protecting Billie from haters, and saying that like Billie Eilish doesn't make depressed music. Kids are depressed, and sort of viewing her kid in that sort of pop culture landscape as some sort of, this is the cliche of all cliches, but voice of a generation, more or less. And it's interesting that they can take a step back and sort of view their daughter from all those angles, and, while still loving and caring for her like a mother would.
Yeah, the speech that her father gives to the camera right after she drives away for the first time, and I guess it's trite in some ways, but it seems very honest, and it seems very well adjusted, and you sort of get a sense of a lot of their relationship and the pretty healthy surroundings she's been provided, in spite of obviously living a very atypical life. I think he comes across great, and I think their relationship with their parents comes across really well. There's also the scene when they're all together in the limo and they sing the was it Feist song
Yes.
together.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3,
1,
4.
2, 3,
Yeah.
4. Yeah. And you know, it's like all the coolness that you might expect from Billie Eilish is sapped away. She's just got her headphones in and she's singing this very popular song with her mom. It's really sweet. It's really endearing.
I guess I would kind of I liked the movie before you kind of mentioned or suggested it. Went back and rewatched it. There's a couple things that I would kind of poke at to just kind of explore the kind of quality of the movie. One thing is that I don't. Okay, so she does have conflict and tension, even though it is like a rise and rise. So for one thing, they deal with, which is like so common in these types of movies, is the physical toll of being on tour and performing.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about that, as a sidebar, but, you see her sprain her ankle and just deal with, having to physically manage putting on these very energetic shows. You see her dealing with her, boyfriend, whatever. That certainly will be a topic of discussion. But we'll kind of tease that. But I'm not sure that I would say the movie shows the process of dealing with these problems. Like, you see her dealing with the physical issues, but then it's not like there's a period where she struggles and then overcomes those issues. And then it's just like she's 17, so then her foot feels better because that's how bodies work when you're 17. It kind of seems like. And in terms of her relationship, like there's a breakup and then she's like bummed and then you don't really hear about it again. And, she seems to be really good at channeling her problems into song. And from a movie perspective, I almost felt like it would be more compelling, or there's an argument that it would have been interesting to see her struggle and then realize that she can channel her problems into song instead of like being good at it in the beginning and then being also good at it at the end.
That's interesting, but I think that would work against her sort of like self-deprecating personality, because even with the sort of physical injuries, there's a scene where she's performing somewhere and she's like, I have shin splints, I'm not supposed to jump, but I'm dumb, so I'm gonna jump. And it's like, of course you like, that is exactly how I wanted her to behave in that moment, even though, as an adult, I'm terrified for her future, at least physically.
You're trying to protect her.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's like, here's the conflict and here's how she fails to sort of solve the self-created problem. Yeah.
What do you think is like the intention of these movies? I mean, what's the? I always wonder what's going on behind the scenes with the producers and the artists. What's the goal here?
I was curious about this because I looked into the director, RJ Cutler, and I'm sort of fascinated as to why he decided to take on Billie Eilish as a subject matter. And I'm still not sure. I think it's perhaps everybody wants to know like the sort of, the cult of personality thing. We want to know the people behind the music more or less. But Billie Eilish to me is sort of singularly interesting in that she is sort of the first of a wave of new pop stardom, and how these young like TikTok, YouTube, whatever pop stars behave. So it's kind of interesting to see the person who begins this sort of trend more or less while we're still in the midst of it, which I think is sort of like just generations sort of folding on top of each other. And that's a longer discussion for another time. But maybe this is a bit of a cop-out, but I assumed with this movie, the messaging or the sort of intent is simply to document this new form of pop modern superstardom in a way that is so incredibly accessible, sort of unlike any generation before it, right? Because even though she's probably self-documenting on social media, or a lot of people are, this is taking it a step beyond that. We have the footage from, I would assume, her mom and dad providing, dance recital footage or what have you, or the video of her talking about Justin Bieber when she's 12. The sort of like, you couldn't have that material for another artist. It's the access that I think really sort of shines here, especially in a time when music journalism doesn't have a lot of access. Beyonce will email you a sentence if you're lucky, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and also that we have a lot, these documentaries are often filled with in-studio footage of them putting together their iconic works. It's rarer that that's happening in their brother's bedroom
right.
in their childhood home, but that's the nature of what she does and what her and Phineas do. And so you have this fantastic footage of them writing this record that is also basically like home footage, you know,
Mhm.
like it's two things at once, right? So I don't know. I was thinking about it like these documentaries are often knocked for being so carefully crafted and about projecting a specific image. And I mean, I'm sure that's happening here to some extent, but I'm not capable of crafting some sort of criticism of what is being left out or what isn't being said, or, you know, what with more critical distance you would include that isn't in here. Maybe somebody who's more familiar with her career than I am would say that there's some glaring omission. But this seems like a pretty honest and straightforward look at her at this period of her career. So any criticism on those lines for me would seem to just be theoretical. Would just be an abstraction about how much say she might have had, less than something specific about what wasn't included.
Yeah, I think I guess the only thought I have on that is in rewatching it, because I watched it originally and reviewed it when it came out. And also, it came out like a month after Olivia Rodrigo's driver's license came out, so it was really quite the moment for talking about the freedom of the road, or what have you. But
And you interviewed Olivia Rodrigo right around that time, right?
I did, yeah. And she's very sweet, and also very incredibly teenage. I've been talking to famous teenagers for like a decade now, and there's something about this like sort of new generation where they don't feign adulthood. They aren't trying to be 23 when they're 16, like I was, which is really refreshing and seems healthy, and perhaps they'll need less therapy. Um, but with Billie Eilish specifically, I think the only thing that maybe this could have benefited from, or maybe it's just like I could do my own research on my own time, is how she gets signed to Interscope and starts that relationship, because there is that scene where she's playing songs for the label guys in Phineas's bedroom, which I really love, because it's like they couldn't be bothered to go to wherever the label office is and do it there, which is kind of fun and feels very intimate. But that I'm sort of curious about. But again, I think it also sort of seems like a shining example when put next to other documentaries around the same time. Like there was a Shawn Mendes Netflix documentary, which doesn't even talk about how he came up from Vine, and it sort of plagues him or positions him as he's some sort of young man plagued by the meaning of it all. But there's no, it's really sort of nebulous and doesn't really mean anything. So like this next to that feels like, wow, this is, given an Oscar for the transparency of it all. And I do find it fascinating that we do have the footage of the Interscope people in her home or whatever, because it also seems to act as like a document of a major label having full confidence in a young starlet. Because when I started watching it, I was like, why do they have this footage of her at 16, the stuff that wasn't clearly documented by her mom and her dad? And it must have been, okay, we're putting all our money behind Billie Eilish, so here we go. So that's interesting, because I haven't heard a lot of conversation of her as an industry plant, or and any of those sort of terms used to demonize young women. But yeah, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, the one thing I've ever encountered along those lines was Ezra Koenig on Time Crisis mentioned that in the time between her 2013 song that put her on people's radar and this album dropping, that it was like a highly anticipated album within the industry space, and that everybody knew that something big was happening, and a lot of people were talking about it. He was careful not to try to craft it in the terms you mentioned about being an industry plant, but said rather like this album didn't come out of nowhere. People were talking about it being a big thing in those circles for a little while, and maybe that's already widely known. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Retroactively, it also makes a lot of sense, because Ocean Eyes is that song that kind of took off for her. And in my mind, excuse me, it came out like after, we're like post Lana Del Rey. We like the sort of whisper falsetto singing, but Billie is so dark and edgy and feels like she wants to belt, but she's too insecure to, and that to me feels very teenage, and it sort of speaks to this sort of Gen Z articulation of youth or what have you. But yeah, I mean, maybe there are industry professionals who saw it before I did, and God bless them.
Yeah.
I want to just play off something you just said because I wanted to talk a little bit about Billie Eilish as a musician and her vocal influences. I mean, it's definitely like I would say in the tradition of torch song, um, and but not in the belting
Mhm.
side of things. Meaning, she's not. We haven't necessarily like seen a big voice side of her. A little bit, here and there, but she's not going for the American Idol,
Right.
melisma and kind of and the top end of her voice. Like she's just not really pushing that very much at this point. It doesn't mean she doesn't have those skills or can't grow into that. But there's like kind of I would say, I mean, Feist when she sang that song, there's a little bit of that in there. Lord, Lana Del Rey, but also like kind of like a Billie Holiday aspect. And
Hmm.
it's not clear from the movie. I mean, her influences in the sense of she likes Justin Bieber and she likes R&B and things like that. She grew up in this musical family, but it's kind of left up to the imagination to see what her parents are bringing to the table or what she was absorbing in terms of like either jazz or other things that do seem to be part of her vocal makeup.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because I think she certainly has the ability. I think you can't sing in the range in the way that she does without sort of exploring other avenues. Granted, I haven't heard it either. I think there's a little bit more of it on the second record, which comes out after this documentary. But even in those moments where she could belt, she actually screams, which I think is sort
Yeah.
of clever in speaking to youth angst. But it'll be maybe in album 3 we'll hear her actually belt some stuff out. But in even mentioning the second album, Happier Than Ever, now that album's been out for a while and I've lived with that album, going back to this documentary feels vintage to me almost, and it's only been a year. And maybe that's the danger of Andy, what you were saying earlier about a lot of these pop documentaries coming out when an artist is so young or doesn't have the sort of veterancy of even having 2 albums, that perhaps when they're still developing who they are or they're in a new phase, these things can feel dated pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, she even says when they're recording the Bond song, she says like, "Why do people belt?" She doesn't want to do it. She's very self-conscious about even trying it.
Yeah.
The other thing, and so Phineas, they both of them together just have, to your point, David, about it sort of coming all over the place, but they don't actually describe or talk about their influences or their interests. It's interesting though because they clearly have really good taste. They really have this really refined sensibility about what they like and what they don't like and what sounds good, and they're in line with those thoughts completely. They have this shorthand dialogue when they're discussing lyrics and sounds, and he'll play a little riff and she immediately says, "Oh, that would sound good with this other little snippet of lyrics that they had written previously." So that's really fun to watch. But the one part about where you can find influences from, he plays one song to his dad, and as they were playing it, I said out loud, "Oh, it kind of sounds like Leonard Cohen." And then I don't know exactly what their dad says, but to it, Phineas replies, "People who don't write songs always say what songs sound like other songs."
Yes.
and like a moment after I had done exactly that thing, I was just like, "All right, I'm appropriately put in my place, Phineas. I apologize. I will not try music criticism by comparison to you again, sir."
I want to talk a little bit about Phineas because that is the other major dynamic here. So Phineas is the older brother. He's an artist on his own and a producer. It was really cool to see the singer songwriter / producer dynamic going on, and to see the differences between them. Phineas released an album last year of his own,
Mm-hmm.
and if you go back and listen to it, I kind of felt like it was it really illuminated a lot about Billie and what she brings to the table, because Billie can play. She plays ukulele. You see her playing a little piano, but she's not. Doesn't seem to be, an instrumentalist in the same way that Phineas is like a really gifted instrumentalist. He can sing too and produce and do all these things. She's really the kind of visionary artist, and his album was like fine to me, competent, well crafted pop music, but it didn't have the spark that Billie's stuff does, in my opinion. And I kind of felt like the best way to understand that in the movie was the Bond song,
Hmm.
which to me was a fine enough song, and like, you know, she just won a Golden Globe or whatever as we're recording, so good for her. And them, but it's that seemed to me like it was a Phineas production, meaning like they'd gotten hired to do this. She's on the road, she's in hotel rooms recording the vocals. You don't really see her working out the vocal or contributing that much. It seems a little bit more like that's just a job,
Mhm.
and a paycheck. And I don't know, Mike. That was kind of my read on it. Is like Phineas is, you know, he needs somebody to have that vision, and she needs somebody who has the craftsmanship. Am I underselling him, or am I misreading that
I
relationship? You
I
think?
think that's fair. I also like. I think Phineas is totally fascinating, and I would love to profile him one day. The big caveat is don't generally like his solo music very much, and I think a lot of it is just because I consider him so much of a musician producer as opposed to musician singer songwriter, as you've pointed out. Um, and I don't remember if it's in this documentary, but it's certainly in other, you know, interviews with him or whatever, especially solo ones, where he'll sort of say that like he enjoys songwriting, Billie doesn't enjoy songwriting. They sort of started working together when he quickly realized that he could write a song and it would sound better if Billie performed it because of her the sort of unique tonality of her voice and the sort of, you know, idiosyncrasies of being Billie Eilish, which I find kind of fascinating. That like sort of immediately he's cared so much about the actual song that, like, you know, ego aside, put my sister in the spotlight, which, you know, is they just seem really self-actualized and generally well-adjusted people, which which, you know, plays out in their songwriting dynamic, I think, a bit, and in their relationship as best friends slash brother sister.
Yeah, I agree. And so to me, the most interesting part of this movie is their musical relationship, more than the parent relationship, because they have this their conversations when they're writing and producing these songs are in some ways very familiar as musicians talking to their producers. You know, like it sounds a lot like when Jimmy Iovine and Tom Petty are talking about a production. But it also is so familiar as a brother and a sister talking to each other. And seeing both of those things happen at once it's just a very fascinating musical relationship to me, where she's doing this like self-loathing, cynical thing about how much she hates music and it's torture, and you know, she's terrible. She never wants to do it anymore. And he sort of is the older brother who just says, "You're very good, and a lot of people would agree with me that you're very good. Now let's try it this way that I just said. Let's try it, and it'll be okay." And you know, that she's teasing herself about being self-conscious about the internet, thinking that she's being too careerist with this Bond song. And he doesn't say, he doesn't chastise her. He just laughs at her. You know, it's a really it's a really interesting creative relationship, and it's a really endearing familial relationship, and it's happening at the same time, which I think makes for something I've not really ever seen before. It's and to see it all at such length, that to me is what makes this movie so interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's that other moment where I can't remember if it's for the Bond song or if it's for a single or something, but he sort of withholds the information that the label is like pushing for a big hit from Billie, which isn't a great business move, right? But it feels like very like how a brother could protect his sister, and then also understands how she works, and then she'll work better without this looming deadline. And one of my favorite moments in the documentary is when they're in Phineas's room. It's just Phineas and Billie, and they do the Invisalign album opening, because the album opens like, I'm taking out my Invisalign and here's the album, which is so goofy, and it feels like something that, like, you know, could have been left at home. And I'm so glad it's on the record, because it's sort of like our introduction to Billie is this sort of like silly family gal, and then you get all the creepy gothic production and whatnot, which I really love and appreciate.
I was trying to think of like examples of a similar dynamic, you know, in terms of, you know, the brother, the siblings, and the producer slash composer, you know, and the singer. Unfortunately, the one that came to mind, which is definitely the dark worst case scenario version of this is the Carpenters.
Mm.
And I mean, you've got the brother who's this like visionary producer, songwriter, very talented, but realizes that his sister has this incredible voice and can communicate these pop songs, in a way that the world is just going to catch on to. She obviously was a drummer and a musician too, Karen, but her own insecurities and the way that the world worked at the time, led to the tragic outcome of that story. It was reminded because I watched Superstar, the Todd Haynes movie about the Carpenters, because Andy and I were falling all over ourselves in love with the Velvet Underground movie that he did. Just tying the Rock Docs extended cinematic universe together here. But I mean, hopefully just thinking of that, makes me feel like maybe the industry and our culture in a way has evolved in the last 50 years to, hopefully be more supportive of people who are artists who are dealing with their own insecurities in a very public way. But again, I mean, if there had been social media 50 years ago, it probably would have been even worse. So tribute to the, I mean, I'm just going to go back to say like tribute to her parents, her and Phineas's parents just really crushed it. They're the heroes of this movie. If there's an antagonist to this movie, I would say it is her boyfriend, Q. He's only referred to as Q, not the James Bond Q, who's, I guess relates to their career as well. But yeah, he's just a dude, I guess. I don't know, who's in and out of her life. As she's like blowing up and playing Coachella and having all these big hits, she's like constantly on the phone with him. Like, where are you? Are you coming to visit me? Or like, do you care about me? And he just kind of occasionally shows up and like smiles and is an idiot. I don't know. Like maybe he's a great guy and a super person. He's not well served by the movie.
Right.
But I'm just like, what are you doing with this guy?
Yeah.
Clearly that was the intention.
Right. Exactly. I was actually, as somebody who has sort of closely watched Billie Eilish's career since relatively close to the beginning, I was shocked that she like admitted to having a partner, because that's also not a very common thing in pop music, right? Unless they can serve your career in some direct way. But this guy is a SoundCloud rapper, so perhaps not so much that.
But that's like when John Lennon, like they didn't want to admit that he was married.
Right. Exactly. It's exactly that. But yeah, so it was sort of like really revealing to see this guy existed, and not really sure why he agreed to be in this documentary, but I guess
another wise choice, Q.
Yeah, I guess I will commend his courage for doing that. But I suppose when you're in a relationship and you're a teenager, you don't expect it to end poorly. And then the way that it does end, Billy, there's this line that Billy is like, it wasn't good enough, or this relationship wasn't healthy for the both of us, but she sort of makes it just sound, I can't remember the language, so this isn't really helpful at all, but she's so generous to him. And I'm like, oh man, that's how I was when I was 19. And it was like, objectively, this person did you wrong. I'm glad you're out of this relationship, but you don't have to be so kind to this guy who perhaps doesn't deserve such kindness.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's a rapper named, is it 7 Amp or 7 AMP?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Never said it out loud until now. So
yes.
someone correct us.
Yeah. And he's like 5 years older than her. So he, I was trying to be deferential when I was watching it. Like, okay, they're high schoolers in a high school relationship. Far be it of me to crush this guy for being a jerky teenage boyfriend, but he wasn't a teenager. He was like 25. So,
well, 21.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
He was, that was a little creepy as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting though, as part of the movie, because everything about it is just so reminiscent of your like young romances, like right down to her being on tour in Europe and having FOMO that the squad is going to Big Bear.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you are playing
a very SoCal moment.
It is a very SoCal moment. And it's like, I don't know, maybe it's cooler to play to 20,000 people in France. I don't know. But it's normal for a high schooler, and it's refreshing that she's not world weary about those sorts of youthful experiences, that she wanted to go to Big Bear with the squad, and when she sees Q the first time we see him, she's just like, she's like pointing out his outfit, and she's like, "You look so good." She's like into his fashion. That's like part of their it is a show don't tell reminder that she is 17 at the time of the filming of this, and in spite of her very tasteful music and her very non-teenage sound in some ways, that she's a kid and she's got a lot of life to live ahead. And it's easy to forget when you listen to her music because it just doesn't sound like that, you know?
Right.
And then if you're watching a fictional movie, a feature film, and like in the credits, in the beginning, it'll say like, and starring this big, and featuring this big star as whatever, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get one or two good scenes with that person.
Yeah.
That person in this movie is Justin Bieber.
Yes.
He shows up and just pops up from time to time. And the relationship between them, I think, is really sweet. I mean, you probably have followed his career more closely than I have, Maria, but like, what do you think about his role here and what role he plays for younger artists who are, he's now 10, whatever, maybe 20 years older than?
Yeah, I actually think the relationship between Justin Bieber and Billie Eilish is my favorite part of the movie. So we each have our sort of perceptions. It's specifically because it's like this wonderfully specific and generously treated articulation of fandom, right? She's totally obsessed with this guy and then gets to a similar position. Also a career bred of the internet. Justin Bieber famously made famous, I guess, by Usher on YouTube. So very similar, at least in career trajectories, being of this digital age. And it seems like sort of immediately they have this unspoken bond, and the like playing field level is the same. Now I'm trying to figure out how do I want to explain this. I suppose I really just, it made me like Justin Bieber. I'm not totally endeared to him, perhaps because of his public persona for many, many years, but it sort of shows how kind he can be to her. And then in the next scene, you see how kind Billie is to her own fans. And I think that's sort of a really beautiful portrayal and choice to sort of juxtapose those two things to one another.
Yeah. And she starts out at the beginning, early in the film. I think it's during a radio interview. She talks about how she doesn't like to think of her relationship with her fans as artist and fan, that she wants it to be seen as a real human relationship. And the first time I was watching it, as I was hearing that, I was thinking like, oh, that's interesting that she has this idea, but as I was hearing it the first time, I was thinking that's not actually, she's not articulating anything especially profound, but it feels important to her.
Sure.
And then over the course of the film, you draw back to how she viewed it through her fandom with Justin Bieber, and that she's trying to keep that in mind now that she's famous, and that it connects back to now a friendship with Justin Bieber. So it actually, that imagined relationship that she had becomes a genuine relationship at the same time that she's crafting this, what she hopes is a genuine relationship with her fans. And it's like, actually, that was quite profound. It might have sounded like the, early sketch ramblings of a 16-year-old in the first 10 minutes of the movie, but it's actually much more of a fully formed thought than I had given it credit for. And I think that works really well in the movie. And I think it's because of Bieber. And I also do think he comes across really well.
Yeah, I will also say I think some of this has to do with age, which is why I felt that it had a real emotional impact, because she is the same age as a lot of the people listening to her music. So there is that sort of immediate camaraderie based on solely age demographic, and to the fact that typically if you're a star and you were sort of obsessed with a musician and you meet them later in your career because you have some success, you're a little bit older, you're sort of distanced from that super fandom. And though there is quite there's a big distance between being 12 and being 17, or whatever, however old she is when she finally meets Justin Bieber, you can tell that she's still sort of overcome by her fandom. She's literally crying in his arms at Coachella, which like made me weep because I'm a sucker for people losing it over music and musicians they love. Which, if she was a little bit older, perhaps the reaction would have been a little less emotional, I guess, and less effective in this documentary setting.
Well, and juxtaposed with her encounter with Katy Perry and Orlando Bloom.
Oh, yes.
Which, boy, Did Orlando Bloom walk away from that just feeling 65 years old and completely insignificant to the youth of today? Right down to when she brings him back and she's like, my 9-year-old self would be so excited. It's like good way to make somebody feel absolutely prehistoric.
Truly, but he seemed like he was in outer space in that scene. Like he did not really know what was going on. And I was like, okay, maybe don't get on camera when you're having some fun late night at Coachella, but whatever, man.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not sure Orlando Bloom really cares about what,
Fair.
I think he's already won that game.
Sure.
One thing that also kind of stands out is her, and this movie really takes a lot of effort to focus on, is her as a overall visual artist, not just a musician. You see in the very beginning her kind of struggling with the direction of one of her first videos, and at the end of the movie you see her very proudly being credited as the director of a video. Her visual presentation of herself is always really striking and always has been, continues to evolve. But
her notebook, her notebook that we get to see, where she says she
doodles and
everything from drawing a song, which is very abstract, to drawing a dick and just like being very, very juvenile about it.
Very 15-year-old. Like, okay, and now this, Maria, what do you think in terms of like the view of her? We've spoken about how people look at her as a musical artist, but what do you think about the view of her as a visual artist?
It's almost, if not as important as her music, I think, because people sort of, especially in the music discovery on YouTube or what have you, you're watching as much as you are listening if you're doing so actively. And I think that part of the draw of Billie Eilish isn't simply her music. It is these striking images, the sort of gothy. It's also interesting because her music is so soft and delicate at times. I mean, the production can get a little like haunted housey, or vaudevillian. But for the most part, she's singing in a falsetto or sort of high pitched voice or a higher range, and that she has these really horrifying images of a tarantula coming out of her mouth, and sort of her iris is obscured with with contact lenses, which to me, I always think of like Marilyn Manson, unfortunately, or a character like that. And I also think, in this era or whatever, you have to be a visual artist as much as an auditory one, for lack of a better phrase. I loved seeing her notebooks too, because I was just like, this could be notebooks written from like an emo artist in 2002 or something, or just an angsty kid in the 90s. It feels sort of timeless in that way. And it was really kind of fun to get that inside look at how she thinks.
Yeah,
haunted housey is such a good way to say it, and I just want to direct people to recently, like around Halloween, I guess. She was at the Hollywood Bowl with Danny Elfman performing as Sally in the Nightmare Before Elm Street, Nightmare Before Christmas live concert, and she just absolutely crushed it, and you could just tell that she just like was so stoked. Like clearly that was a big influence on her. Nightmare Before Christmas, the Danny Elfman aesthetic, like I think is definitely there as well. So go look that up on YouTube, people. You will be delighted.
Yeah.
I know we're getting close to your time, Maria. So we just want to make sure we hit a couple more things. So I mean, generally speaking, I think we know what everybody's answer is going to be, but we always kind of get towards the close here by asking, if you would recommend this movie to somebody who's not already a big fan of this artist particularly, but just likes music documentaries or something like that in general, where would you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I'm going to say you should absolutely watch it. If you're a fan of music documentaries, if you don't care for them, it is almost 2.5 hours long, so it's quite the commitment. But it is sort of a fascinating watch. It feels remarkably intimate for somebody of her fame and age, and success. And there is an intermission, so if you wanted to take a break, you could. And I also think I've seen this documentary described as a concert documentary, which feels like perhaps not watched in full. But it is not overwhelmed by live performances, which I know can sometimes dissuade people from watching something. But yeah, I think it's really great. And if you're only going to watch one, maybe like teen or Gen Z pop documentary this year, make it this one. Why not?
Andy?
Yeah, I'm all in on this movie. It was great. I was watching with my wife, and I was like, I was like I was like flirting with the movie. Like I was like kept looking back at my wife with like a big smile on my face. Like, isn't this incredible? Look at this. Like we're in the bedroom with her and Phineas. This is great. You know, I found this movie really good and probably will. I always liked Billie Eilish's music from the first time I heard it. I won't pretend that I listened to it a lot, but when I heard it, I liked it, and I think this movie will probably make me much more likely to track her career intentionally as opposed to passively. So I thought it was a great movie.
Well, I think that's going to be a yes all around. I mean, I was introduced to Billie Eilish in probably the corniest possible way, which is my wife told me that she heard about her on NPR. So that is the middle-aged dad way of music discovery.
That's that
shout out
is
to my wife Mana. Good call.
That makes you that is the corollary to Billie's dad showing her the different faucet heads on the hose.
Yes.
That is
when she's teaching her how to wash a car.
That is some A plus dad right there. Just like you're gonna want to use this one. Right?
Exactly. But despite maybe not being in the demographic, this is a really good example of like if you're a person who came to this like me and Andy, who mostly sits around and watches the history of the Eagles over and over again. This really does pay off. I mean, the bottom line with this type of music documentary and a lot of them is like, is this a charming, compelling, interesting person to spend however many hours with in your day? And like Billie Eilish is definitely that person, at least at this era, where you just enjoy hanging out with her. She's interesting. She's never boring. And as soon as she opens her mouth to sing, you're like, even like at any point, you're just blown away because it's like what is coming out of this young person is incredible. So, we all really enjoyed it. No, no knocks to be heard around here.
Yeah.
Okay, so Maria, thank you so much for joining us as our very special guest. Again, it's at Maria Sherman on the Bird website. And her book, Larger Than Life, is available where books are found. Of course, we would always recommend one supports a local bookstore and all that fun stuff. But wherever you buy books, check it out. It's very entertaining. Any new projects or anything coming up that you want to kind of shout out or preview?
Nothing I can talk about just yet, which I hope makes me sound cool and mysterious and not like I'm dodging this question. But yeah, I really appreciate it. This has been so fun.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll have you back when we have new projects that you can discuss. But, yeah, thanks for listening. You can find us at Rock Docs Pod on the various places. And thanks for listening to Rock Docs.